I walked through my front door with flowers in my hand and a stupid grin on my face. And 30 seconds later, I was on my knees on the kitchen floor, shaking so hard I couldn't breathe. My wife wasn't home, but the ambulance that had just left was for her. And what I found out over the next 72 hours completely shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my life, and the woman I had loved for 11 years.
My name is Daniel. I'm 41 years old. I live in a small city in Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows your neighbor's dog's name, where Friday nights mean high school football and Saturday mornings mean yard work and coffee on the porch. Normal. That's the word I always used to describe my life. And I meant it as a compliment. I work in logistics management. I travel for work, not constantly, but enough. Maybe a week here, 10 days there. Sometimes longer if a client needs hands-on restructuring at a warehouse or distribution center. I'd been doing it for about 8 years, and honestly, I was good at it. My boss trusted me. My clients requested me by name. My wife, Rachel, was a middle school art teacher. She had this incredible ability to make kids who thought they were terrible at everything suddenly believe they were artists. She'd come home with paint on her forearms almost every day. I used to tease her about it. She'd laugh and say, "That's just proof I showed up." We met in our late 20s at a mutual friend's wedding. She spilled red wine on my jacket within the first 10 minutes of meeting me. I told her not to worry about it. She said, "Most guys would have been mad." I said, "Most guys haven't met you yet." Cheesy, I know. But it worked. We got married 3 years later. No kids yet. We talked about it, kept saying soon, the way people do when they're comfortable but not quite ready. We had a house, 2 cars, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and a marriage that I genuinely believed was solid. That's the thing about comfort. It can make you blind. Looking back now, I can see the science. But at the time, I explained every single one of them away. It started about 8 months before everything fell apart. Rachel started sleeping poorly. She'd be up at 2, 3 in the morning. I'd find her sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, just staring at nothing. I'd ask her what was wrong. She'd say, "Just tired, babe. Work stuff. You know how it gets." I knew how it got. So I believed her. Then she started losing weight. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. Her cheekbones got sharper. The clothes she used to fill out started hanging differently. I asked her about it. She said she'd been eating cleaner, walking more. She even showed me some meal prep containers in the fridge. I told her she looked great. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. There were phone calls she'd take outside. Doctor's appointments she mentioned offhandedly, and then never followed up on when I asked. A new tiredness that wasn't just about school or stress, it was deeper than that. Like something was pulling her down from the inside. And then there were the moments where she'd just look at me, really look at me, with this expression I couldn't name. Like she was trying to memorize my face. I thought she was stressed about her job. I thought maybe we were in a rough patch. I even pulled up some articles online about how couples fall into emotional distance in their mid-30s. I never once thought, not even for a second, that she was sick. I was in Portland for a logistics conference. 3-day trip. I'd been there before, it was routine. But on the second night, I got a call from my client saying they were pushing the final session to a video call instead. The in-person wrap-up was cancelled. Which meant I could leave a full day early. I booked the first flight home. I didn't tell Rachel. I wanted to surprise her. I stopped at her favorite flower shop, Sunflowers, always sunflowers, and I picked up a bottle of that overpriced sparkling cider she loved because she never drank alcohol. I was excited. I felt like a good husband. I pulled into our driveway at around 4 in the afternoon. And that's when I saw her neighbor, Diane, standing at the edge of our yard. Diane is in her 60s, a retired nurse. She's the kind of woman who brings soup when you're sick and remembers everyone's birthday. She was standing there with her arms crossed, and when she saw me get out of the car, her face did something I'll never forget. It collapsed. "Daniel," she said, and her voice cracked. "Oh, honey. You're home," I said. "Yeah, I got back early. Is everything okay?" She walked toward me, and she put both hands on my arms, and she said, "Rachel is at St. Vincent's. She was taken by ambulance about 2 hours ago. She's in the ICU." I heard the words. But they didn't process. I said, "I'm sorry, what?" She collapsed in the living room. I heard Biscuit barking. He wouldn't stop, so I used the spare key you gave me. "Daniel, she was on the floor." I dropped the sunflowers. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I remember being at a red light, and realizing my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had gone white. I remember some song playing on the radio, something soft and ordinary, and thinking how insane it was that the world was still just going on like normal. I ran into the ER. I told them my wife's name. They took me to a family consultation room, which, if you've ever been in one of those small beige rooms with the box of tissues on the table, you know that nothing good ever happens there. A doctor came in. Dr. Okafor. I'll never forget her. She was calm and direct and kind all at once. She told me Rachel was in the ICU. She told me Rachel had been diagnosed with a serious autoimmune condition, one that had been attacking her organs quietly for months. Her kidneys were under significant stress. She had collapsed due to a combination of dehydration, exhaustion, and a sudden escalation of her symptoms. And then Dr. Okafor said something that hit me like a freight train. She said, "Mr. Hartwell, your wife has known about this diagnosis for approximately 6 months. 6 months. I sat there in that little beige room with the tissue box and I felt the floor shift beneath me. 6 months she had known. 6 months of weight loss and sleepless nights and faraway looks and stepping outside to take phone calls. 6 months of carrying this enormous, terrifying thing completely alone. And not telling me. I couldn't decide what I felt more, terrified for her, or devastated by the secret. I went in to see her. She was awake barely. There were tubes. There were monitors. There were sounds that hospitals make that you never want to associate with someone you love. When she saw me, her face crumpled. "You weren't supposed to be home," she whispered. And I said, my voice breaking, "Rachel, why didn't you tell me?" She turned her head toward the window. And she said, "Because I didn't want to be sick in front of you. I didn't want to be sick in front of you." I've turned that sentence over in my mind 1,000 times since that day. And every time, it cuts differently. She was in the ICU for 4 days. Then a regular room for another week. During that time, I barely left the hospital. I slept in the chair next to her bed with a hospital blanket that smelled like plastic. I ate vending machine sandwiches. I called her school and explained everything. I called our families. And slowly, in those quiet hospital hours, she told me everything. She had gone to the doctor 6 months ago for fatigue. Routine blood work came back unusual. More tests followed. Then a specialist. Then a diagnosis she didn't know how to say out loud. She said she'd spent the first month in denial. The second month researching obsessively. The third month trying to get her affairs in order. Which, when your wife says that to you, it's like someone reaches into your chest and squeezes. She said she didn't tell me because she didn't want to change how I looked at her. "I didn't want to become your patient," she said. "I wanted to stay your wife." I held her hand and I said, "Rachel, you being sick doesn't change what you are to me. You could be every kind of broken and you'd still be mine." She cried. I cried. Biscuit was at home probably destroying a couch cushion, but I'd deal with that later. But here's the thing, as much as my heart broke for her, as much as I understood her fear, there was a real, honest conversation we had to have. Because the secret, the silence, had done something to us. It had created a wall I hadn't even known was there. And once I started thinking about those 8 months of, "I'm fine," and "just tired," and phone calls taken outside, I realized how alone she had felt inside our marriage. And that was partly on me. Here's where the story turns in a direction I didn't expect. When Rachel started getting better, when the medication started stabilizing things, when the doctors outlined a treatment plan that was manageable, we started seeing a therapist together. A couples therapist named Dr. Yun, who had this calm, no-nonsense way of getting straight to the real issue. And the real issue wasn't just Rachel's secret. It was that somewhere along the way, I had stopped being fully present in my marriage. Not unfaithful. Not cruel. But absent. Always traveling. Always handling someone else's logistics crisis. Coming home tired and distracted. Never quite asking the deeper questions. Never noticing that the woman I loved had quietly learned to navigate her own fears without me. Dr. Yun said something that I think about constantly now. She said, "Secrets in a marriage rarely come from deception. Usually, they come from a fear that the truth won't be received with love." That hit me harder than anything. Now, I know what you're thinking. Where's the karma? Where's the betrayal getting punished? Here's the thing. This isn't that kind of story. The villain here wasn't some other man or some scheming coworker. The villain was silence, fear, pride, and the culture we'd built in our marriage where we both pretended everything was fine because either of us wanted to be the one who made things hard. But karma? It showed up. Just not the way you'd expect. About 3 months after Rachel came home from the hospital, her school district had a new principal come in, a younger guy named Todd who had a reputation for cutting programs he called non-essential. Art was one of the first on his list. Rachel had just been through the hardest physical and emotional experience of her life. She was doing treatment. She was rebuilding. And this man called her into his office and told her that the art program was being restructured, which everyone knew meant gutted. I expected Rachel to be devastated. Instead, she walked out of that meeting, went home, and spent the next 2 weeks doing something I didn't expect. She organized the parents. She contacted the local news. She collected student testimonials. Kids talking about how art class was the only place they felt seen, the only hour of the day they didn't feel like failures. She put together a presentation for the school board so detailed, so emotional, so undeniable, that when the board meeting came, the auditorium was packed. Todd sat at that board table looking smaller by the minute. The vote to preserve the program passed 6-1. And afterward, a reporter from the local paper interviewed Rachel in the hallway. She looked the camera straight on, still a little thinner than she used to be, still with the slight shadows under her eyes that the treatment caused, and she said, "I spent a long time hiding. I'm done hiding." I watched it on my phone in our driveway and cried like a baby. That was her karma moment. Not revenge. Reclamation. As for Todd, he quietly resigned at the end of that school year after 3 separate complaints from faculty. Sometimes the universe doesn't need your help. It's been 14 months since I walked up our driveway with sunflowers and found out my wife was in the ICU. Rachel is doing better. Not cured. Her condition is chronic, which means it's something we manage together now, one day at a time. There are hard weeks. There are medication adjustments and specialist appointments and days where she's exhausted by 2 in the afternoon. There are moments I catch her looking tired in a way that still scares me. But she tells me now. When it's a bad day, she says so. When she's scared, she says so. And when I'm stressed about work or distracted, she says that too. We talk differently than we used to. I took a position at work that has me traveling significantly less. My boss wasn't thrilled. I told him I needed to be home more. He asked why. I told him my wife was sick. It was the first time in my adult life I said something like that plainly, and without apology. Biscuit is still alive, still ridiculous, still sleeps between us on the bed even though he's technically not supposed to. And Rachel still gets paint on her forearms almost every day. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this. The people we love most are often the ones we're most afraid to be honest with. We protect them from our fear, and in doing so, we make them strangers to our lives. Don't wait for an ambulance to show you what's standing in your own living room. Ask the hard questions. Stay when it gets uncomfortable. Show up, not just physically, but fully. And if the person you love is carrying something heavy in silence, make it safe enough for them to put it down. I almost lost my wife without ever knowing she was afraid. I will spend the rest of my life making sure she never feels that alone again. If this story hit home for you, share it. Subscribe. And tell someone you love something real today. You never know what they might be carrying.